Hi, it's David Parrish, and I'm welcoming you to the World Missions and Evangelism video blog. Today, we're going to continue talking for a few minutes about the process that we went through in starting the Honduras/Latin American Church Planting Movement Project. And in our previous video blogs over the last month or so, we've been kind of just telling you what our journey has been like with a step-by-step process that we went through in getting started. And last time I ended with talking about how that after our missionary strategy coordinators, Randy and Linda, and Keith and Juanita Travis had located themselves now by 2008 in Honduras, and they had recruited a team of about 14 men and some of their family members as well, and we had developed a base, and they were getting ready to start the work there. And beginning from May through June, our team was trained in the church planting movement strategy. And then beginning in July, on July the 23rd, they went out into the village areas looking for people of peace for the very first time. Now today I'm going to take up the story from there. The foundation has been laid and the team has gone out into villages. And when they went into these village areas in western Honduras, initially they were looking for a person of peace. They would go into a village and they would go in either as in some natural part of life. From time to time they would be selling something. They might be coming in with medical supplies or medicines or vitamins for children and things like that. We went in with our well drill, and they went in and began to find communities and individuals that needed a water well drilled for them, and we would partner with them. They would do some of the work, and our team would do most of the work, and we would bring that well drill in. And it was through that process of entering these villages, and they would go out two by two, and they would just meet people and just to learn to befriend people. And as they would do that, they would begin talking, and occasionally they would talk about the fact that they were followers of Jesus. They would talk about, would you like to do a Bible study together? And out of that would begin the first Discovery Bible studies. Well, the first thing that happened when we started on July the 23rd, 2008, was immediately, at the very gate, at that very first village in the very first week, spiritual warfare began. Immediately, there was pushback from the enemy. And when we say enemy, we're not talking about people. People are not our enemies. Our enemy, the Bible tells us in Ephesians chapter 6 that we wrestle, our warfare, in other words, is against spiritual forces, Satan and his evil spirits and principalities and powers. And the Bible talks about that in Ephesians chapter 6. And that spiritual warfare can occur in a variety of ways. It can occur in terms of people being led to fight against you or persecute you. It can be physical persecution, or it can be verbal persecution, or it can be just events, things that come against you, things that try to stop you, circumstances. Or it can be sometimes outright spiritual forces, attacks against people's minds and emotions, or attacks against relationships. Spiritual warfare is a multi-phased thing. And we ran into spiritual warfare immediately. And not only spiritual warfare, but just circumstances that immediately begin to push back. The very first thing that happened in the very first village that they went to drill the very first water well in the very first week was that Randy Travis, our strategy coordinator, was attacked and bitten by a rabid dog. And that's right, the head of the project was bitten by a rabid dog the first week in the first village. And of course, this required medical care. He wasn't damaged by the dog as far as physically in terms of any kind of impairment, but what he was this dog immediately went away, and we were given indication this dog had rabies, and they were never able to find that dog again. Randy, we had to find a doctor in that area and had to go through the treatment for that extended over a period of weeks. And meanwhile, as he would take the treatments or the shots that related to that and the physical tiredness, and he wasn't feeling well, that didn't stop him from getting up early every morning and the team meeting in intense prayer every morning and going out and working every day. And they continued to work through the face of it. Well, that started the last week of July. They worked through August, and they worked through September. They began to find what they thought were people of peace, and some turned out to be people of peace, some didn't. And then in October, torrential rains and flooding hit Honduras. In the month of October, the flooding of 2008 was so bad in the areas where they were that they had actually by this time started a few Discovery Bible studies. And in some cases, the roads would wash out. And they weren't even able, because of the flooding, to even get back into those areas. For weeks went by. They would be in the middle of drilling wells or doing different things. And the work would have to be stopped in the midst of just torrential floods that came. And so, through the weather circumstances and the attack of the rabid dog and other circumstances that came, that first summer and fall, going into villages and going into those areas, became just a battlefield of, and in the midst of it, God would give them people of peace, and there were people that wanted to start with Discovery Bible studies. The Discovery Bible studies got started that fall. By December of 2008, there were somewhere around 25 first-generation Discovery Bible studies had started by December. Now, by this time, they had worked for about 6 months in the field. And there were about 25 Discovery Bible studies. They had just pushed on through all those things. Randy recovered from everything. He took the treatment. He was fine. They continued work. And about 25 Discovery Bible studies started. But then, when the Discovery Bible studies had started, some of them were having trouble. Some of the groups had started, but they didn't seem to be able to understand the Discovery Bible studies the way we were doing them at that time. Meanwhile, that fall, I had an opportunity to reconnect with David Watson, who was kind of our mentor in this process. David was flying into Nashville, and I found out about it, and so I drove over to the airport, picked David up, and we went to a restaurant, and we talked for about 4 hours together. Then I shared with David what all was going on. You know, this goes back to that mentoring. We need mentors. We need to keep learning, and believe me, when you start making disciples, you will find out that you just got to keep learning yourself. And so we were, while at the same time doing it, and we were talking and sharing, and David said to me, what if I came to Honduras? Would you like me to come to Honduras and do a supplemental training for your team? And I said, that would be awesome. And he and his son Paul, David and Paul Watson, came in December of 2008. And I flew down. And we went down there in December of 2008, and we gathered our team back together. And David did an intense training for us there. And he trained in the same things we had already trained him in, but he brought some new insights, some deeper insights. And he really helped us. We said, well, here's what we're facing. Here's the problems we've had in certain Bible studies. Here's an issue that some of our groups are having, and we've got a high illiteracy rate here, and several of them can't read the scriptures. And he said, well, have you thought about trying recordings? And we said, no, we hadn't thought about that. And then he talked to us. He says, here's what a Discovery Bible study should really look like. By the way, if you want to know the kinds of things that he taught us there, go to the World Missions and Evangelism website at worldmissionsevangelism.com. And when you go to worldmissionsevangelism.com, click on the top that says About Us. And then down will come a menu, and you'll see a thing that says Discovery Bible Studies. If you click on that, there'll come down a menu which talks about how to do a Discovery Bible Study and what questions should be asked. That's what he taught us there in December of 2008. He said, here's how you do a Discovery Bible Study. He told us how to multiply Discovery Bible Studies. We learned so much that week that David and Paul Watson were there, as they literally gave of themselves and poured out their heart to us. And then they went home. Right after that, it was Christmas. Randy flew home for a short Christmas break. He and his family, he and Linda flew home for just a brief break there at the end of the year. And he and I got together and we spent hours debriefing on everything that David and Paul had taught us. We called up Paul on the phone and we said, hey, we've got more questions. And we talked again, I don't know how long. I don't know how much time we spent on the phone with Paul Watson during that time. But when it was over, as we came to the beginning of 2009, we found areas that we said, here's how we need to change the way the Discovery Bible Studies are done. And let's try this that David talked to us about recording some of the studies. Let's try that out. And we began a process using what our mentors were teaching us. And then Randy and Linda flew back to Honduras in January and began to even give the team some more training. And so as the team had started, they had begun, they had launched out, they had been trained from May and June. They launched out in July. They worked from July to December. About 25 groups had begun. In the midst of torrential flooding, in the midst of the dog bite, in the midst of difficulties, they went ahead to about 25 groups that got started. And then the Watsons came and gave us more encouragement and more training. And then we said, how can we implement these things? And then in January and February began to re-implement these things and to move forward. And it was during that time that Randy then began to experiment with recording the scriptures and some of the discovery questions in an audio format. We were using cassette tapes, and they began to take those out into the villages and see what worked and what didn't work. And we literally used from January to June of 2009 to experiment. We would take a recorded Bible study, questions out there, and we would play that for the people. And we would find out, do you really understand what we're saying here? And sometimes in the groups we would find out, they would say, we don't even know what you're asking. We don't even know what that's talking about. And so in dialogue, well, here's what we were really trying to say. So we would come back and we would re-record them. And literally through trial and error for the next 4 or 5 months, we begin to find out how to phrase the questions. They're the same questions, but how to put them in a phrase, how to express it in such a way that they could understand what was being said, what we were asking. And all of a sudden, we began to see multiplication begin. So that the end of May, the 1st of June, I went down with a team of people, some people from Cave Hill Church of God and some people from Christian Fellowship Church, went to on a trip, and we went into a village area, and we gave out school backpacks to kids. We painted and refurbished a village school. We drilled a well. We did all kinds of things. And we went to some of the Discovery Bible studies, and we sat in the homes of the people in village areas, very remote village areas sometimes, where you could drive part of the way. Some of them we had to walk the rest of the way. And sat in and participated in Discovery Bible studies that were happening in people's homes. And during that period of time, by the end of June, we came home, and the short-term team had come home, and Randy contacted me, and he said, we've got 73 groups. The thing had grown from 25 groups in December to 73 groups by the end of the month of June 2009. We were rejoicing. And not only that, but some of the groups were second generation, groups that had planted groups. And some of the groups, there were even a few, I don't think there were very many, 2 or 3, not very many, but there were a few third generation groups at that moment. And we were so excited. And then, on June the 28th, I either got an email that day or a phone call that day from Randy. And he said, something is happening here in Honduras. The government had been overthrown. And the government of Honduras was going to go on the verge of civil war for the next 5 months. 2 days later, Randy and Linda and Keith and Juanita were in San Pedro Sula, and a mob of people recognized them, we think, as Americans, and began to chase them. They would have been captured and beaten, maybe killed. But God sent a deliverance. As they came around a corner, there was a taxi cab. They all jumped into a cab and said, "Get out of here," and they escaped the mob. Honduras became a powder keg, and a season of incredible warfare began on June the 28th, 2009. What's the principle? Well, the principle is this, and next week I'll take up from there what happened from June the 28th and the next 6 months. It looked like everything that had got started could have been set back. We entered a time of incredible spiritual warfare. What did we learn? What's the lesson? When you start making disciples, if you're going to try to facilitate a church planting movement, expect spiritual warfare. That doesn't mean ask for it. You don't have to ask for it. You just obey God. You just make disciples. You just pray. You just move forward. You'll find the enemy. And the enemy is not people. Regardless of the fact whether it was that mob that chased Randy and Linda and Keith and Juanita and wanted to do them in, whether it might have been people chasing them, but it wasn't the people. We love those people. It wasn't, look, it's not even a dog, a rabid dog. The enemy is Satan. But he uses circumstances and he can use people to try to stop the work of God. But the point that I want to make you is that it started the first week. July 23rd, 2008, they entered the first village. And that week, the opposition began. That week, warfare began. And in spite of it, between July 23rd and June the 28th of 2009, and in spite of changing things and learning more and experimenting and going forward regardless of circumstances, there were 73 Discovery Bible studies happening by June the 28th, 2009. And that day, havoc came into Honduras. As you move forward, the principle is this: expect spiritual warfare, but don't quit. Move forward. Continue to learn. Talk to your mentors. Get advice. Try new things. But don't quit. Move forward with faith and prayer and watch God begin to bring an open door for a harvest. But now the government's overthrown and danger has risen to a new level in Honduras in the middle of 2009. But what I'm going to share with you next week is how in the middle of the next 5 months, and in the middle of a period of time where there was actually some setbacks, it was actually in the midst of the setbacks that God opened the greatest door to us in that nation. We'll talk about that next week. Thanks for watching.